They said he was gone. Machines breathed for him. The monitors were steady, indifferent, like the world had already decided his story was over. But James Coleman was listening. The billionaire lay motionless in room 417 of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center as doctors spoke in careful tones and cameras waited outside for updates. Everyone believed the same thing, that he was unconscious, unreachable, unaware. Everyone, except him. When his wife stepped close enough to whisper without witnesses, James expected prayers, tears, fear. What he heard instead shattered him. Not grief, not love, relief. In that hospital room, trapped inside a body that refused to respond, James realized the most dangerous part of the accident wasn't the crash on the Pacific Coast Highway. It wasn't the shattered windshield or the twisted metal or the 3-hour surgery that followed. It was the person standing beside his bed. For days, he listened to conversations meant for silence, to plans formed too early, to a truth that only reveals itself when someone believes you can no longer hear. He could have woken up immediately. His mind had never left. But James understood something most people don't. Sometimes the most powerful move is staying silent long enough for the truth to expose itself. And when he finally opened his eyes, he didn't do it to survive. He did it so the lie could never escape. This is the story of a man who built an empire on integrity, only to discover that the greatest threat to everything he'd created wasn't waiting in boardrooms or market fluctuations. It was lying beside him every night, wearing his ring, sharing his name. This is the story of what happens when someone mistakes your silence for absence. And this is the story of how the dead can still hear every word you say. James Coleman's day began the way it always did before sunrise, with precision. At 5:47 a.m., he stood in the kitchen of his Brentwood estate, pulling espresso from the machine he'd learned to operate himself. Miranda still slept. She'd sleep until 9, maybe 10. That was the rhythm they'd settled into over 8 years of marriage. Him rising with purpose, her emerging when the day had already been shaped by others. He didn't resent it. Not anymore. People were different. He'd accepted that. The Wall Street Journal sat folded on the counter. He scanned headlines while sipping his coffee trade negotiations. Market volatility. A profile of a rival logistics CEO who'd just lost a contract James had won 3 months prior. He noted the details but felt no satisfaction. Winning had become routine. At 49, James Coleman controlled an empire that stretched from the port of Long Beach to distribution centers in Dallas, Atlanta, and Chicago. Coleman Global Logistics wasn't just successful, it was indispensable. His warehouses handled everything from electronics to medical supplies. His trucks moved across 48 states, and his ships navigated routes that kept American shelves stocked. Forbes called him the architect of flow. Business Insider labeled him the most boring billionaire in America. He preferred the latter. Boring meant predictable. Predictable meant trustworthy. And trust, in his industry, was currency. By 6:30 a.m., he was in his Tesla Model S, heading south on the 405. Traffic was light. The city still belonged to people who had somewhere important to be. His first meeting was at 8 a.m. in Long Beach, a site inspection of a new automated fulfillment center that would employ 200 people by year's end. His phone rang through the car's speakers. Daniel's name appeared on the dashboard screen. "Morning," James answered. "You're up early." His younger brother's voice carried that familiar mixture of admiration and concern. Daniel ran the Atlanta operations, competent and steady, but always checking in like James might disappear if he looked away too long. Same as always. "Miranda, coming to Long Beach." James paused. "She's not up yet." Silence. Then, "Right. Well, call me after the inspection. I want to hear how the new conveyor system looks." "Will do." The call ended. James knew what Daniel hadn't said, that Miranda never showed interest in the business, that she treated Coleman Global Logistics like a trust fund instead of a living enterprise. Daniel had never liked her, but he'd never said it outright. He didn't need to. The inspection went flawlessly. Engineers walked James through robotics that could sort 12,000 packages per hour. Union reps shook his hand, grateful he'd kept his promise about local hiring. By 10:30 a.m., he was back on the road, heading north toward Santa Monica for a lunch meeting with a potential investor. That's when his phone buzzed again. Miranda. "Hey," he answered. "Where are you?" Her voice was tight, irritated. "Just left Long Beach, heading to Santa Monica." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just didn't know you'd be gone all day. I told you yesterday. Site inspection, then lunch meeting." "Did you?" A pause. "I don't remember." James exhaled slowly. This was the dance, her forgetting, him defending, both of them pretending it mattered. "It's on the shared calendar." "Right. The calendar I never look at." She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "When will you be home?" "Probably around 3. "Fine. I'm going to the gallery with Simone. Don't wait up if you finish early." "It's barely 11 a.m. You know what I mean." Another pause. "Be safe." The call ended before he could respond. James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Be safe. She always said that. Every phone call, every departure, every trip. Be safe. As if the words were a talisman, protection against the chaos of the world. He wondered when he'd started noticing how empty they sounded. The Pacific Coast Highway stretched before him, ocean to the left, cliffs to the right. It was one of the most beautiful drives in California, the kind of route tourists planned vacations around. James barely noticed anymore. He'd driven it hundreds of times, his mind usually elsewhere, calculating, planning, optimizing. Today, his thoughts circled Miranda. When had things changed? Not dramatically. There'd been no explosive fight, no discovered affair, no singular moment of betrayal, just erosion, the slow wearing away of something that had once felt solid. They'd met at a charity gala in Dallas 9 years ago. She'd been radiant, sharp-witted, magnetic, the kind of woman who made rooms feel smaller just by entering them. She'd worked in art acquisition, traveled frequently, spoke 3 languages. She'd challenged him, made him laugh, pulled him out of the relentless gravity of work. "You're going to forget how to be human," she'd told him on their 3rd date. "All you do is build and optimize. When do you actually live?" So he'd tried. More trips, more spontaneity, more presence. But the business kept growing, and presence required time, and time was the one resource he couldn't manufacture. Somewhere along the way, Miranda stopped asking him to change. She simply adjusted, filling her days with galleries, friends, shopping trips to New York and Paris. They became parallel lives in the same house. Was that enough? For some marriages, maybe. But James had always believed in partnership, 2 people, building something together, not just existing in proximity. He shook his head. This wasn't the time for existential marriage analysis. He had a lunch meeting to focus on. The rain started at 11:52 a.m., light at first, barely registering on the windshield, then heavier, then torrential. California drivers panicked in rain. James watched as a BMW 2 cars ahead tapped its brakes for no reason, creating a ripple of caution. He slowed, keeping distance, scanning for hazards. The Tesla's sensors chimed, warning of wet conditions, reduced visibility. James switched the wipers to high. That's when he saw it. A white SUV, 3 lanes over, hydroplaning. Its rear end swung wide, the driver overcorrecting, and suddenly 2 tons of metal was spinning across lanes like a hockey puck on ice. James reacted instantly, foot off the accelerator, gentle pressure on the brakes, hands steady. The Tesla's computer assisted, but it couldn't rewrite physics. The SUV clipped a sedan, which careened into a pickup truck, which swerved into James's lane. He jerked the wheel right, too hard. The Tesla's rear tires broke traction. He countersteered, but momentum had already decided the outcome. His car spun, once, twice, then slammed sideways into the concrete barrier separating highway from cliff. The impact sounded like the world ending. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded. His body whipped against the restraints, airbags deploying with violent force. His head snapped left, then forward, and something, maybe the door frame, maybe debris, struck his temple with a crack that felt like a bell ringing inside his skull. Then silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind of silence that follows violence. When reality takes a moment to reassess whether it wants to continue. James opened his eyes. Rain poured through the shattered windshield. His chest burned where the seatbelt had locked. His left arm throbbed. His blood dripped from somewhere above his eyebrow onto his lap. But he was conscious, aware, alive. He tried to move. His fingers responded. His toes wiggled. His neck turned, painfully, but it turned. No paralysis, no catastrophic injury. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by adrenaline clarity. He needed to get out. The car was pressed against the barrier, but the driver's door might still open. He reached for the handle. That's when the second impact came. A delivery truck, unable to stop on the slick road, rear-ended the Tesla at 40 miles per hour. James's world became violence again, another explosion of force, his head whipping back against the headrest, then forward into the deployed airbag. Something snapped in his chest. His vision blurred, doubled, then tunneled. He tasted copper, blood in his mouth. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. And then, finally, darkness. Not death, but the closest thing to it while still breathing. The news helicopters arrived within 20 minutes. A multi-vehicle pileup on PCH involving a billionaire CEO was too good not to broadcast. Cameras captured the wreckage from above, the Tesla crumpled like foil. Emergency vehicles converging. First responders working to extract victims. James Coleman's face was already appearing on phones across the country. Breaking news banners, push notifications, social media speculation. Coleman Global Logistics CEO in critical condition after PCH crash. Billionaire James Coleman airlifted to Cedars-Sinai after multi-car accident. Prayers for James Coleman, one of America's most respected business leaders, fights for life. The jaws of life tore through metal. Paramedics worked with controlled urgency, stabilizing his neck, checking vitals, establishing an IV line. His pulse was weak but present, his breathing shallow but consistent. "We've got him," one paramedic called out. "Trauma, alert to Cedars. Possible TBI, internal bleeding, multiple fractures. Let's move." They lifted him onto a stretcher, loaded him into the helicopter. The rotors screamed to life, and within minutes, James Coleman was airborne, racing toward one of the best trauma centers on the West Coast. Below, investigators measured skid marks and interviewed witnesses. Reporters filed updates. And in Brentwood, Miranda Coleman's phone began ringing with calls she wouldn't answer for another 47 minutes. Because when tragedy strikes, there's always a delay before reality catches up. And sometimes, that delay changes everything. Miranda Coleman was at Hauser and Wirth Gallery in downtown Los Angeles when her phone finally broke through her consciousness. She'd silenced it during the exhibition, a collection of contemporary sculptures that Simone insisted were revolutionary, but looked to Miranda like expensive garbage. Still, she smiled and nodded and sipped champagne, while Simone networked with collectors who had more money than taste. The phone buzzed against her Chanel clutch. Once, twice, 10 times. "Jesus," Simone muttered. "Someone really wants you." Miranda pulled out her phone. 17 missed calls. Daniel's wife. A number she didn't recognize. Another unknown number. 3 more from Daniel. Her stomach dropped. "I need to take this," she said, stepping away from the gallery noise. She called Daniel back. He answered on the first ring. "Where the hell have you been?" His voice was raw, frightened. "At a gallery." "What's wrong?" "James is in the hospital. Cedars-Sinai. There was an accident, a bad one. You need to get there now." The champagne in her stomach turned to acid. "What kind of accident?" "Car crash on PCH. Multi-vehicle. They airlifted him." "Miranda, they're saying." He stopped, recalibrating. "Just get there. I'm flying in from Atlanta. I'll be there in 5 hours." The call ended. Miranda stood frozen in the gallery, surrounded by abstract sculptures and wealthy strangers, her mind refusing to process what she'd just heard. James. Hospital. Airlifted. Miranda. Simone appeared at her elbow. "What's going on?" "I have to go." She was in her Mercedes, a custom white GLE. James had given her for their 7th anniversary within 3 minutes. Traffic was moderate heading toward Beverly Hills, and she drove with the kind of focused autopilot that comes from shock. James was hurt. Seriously hurt, based on Daniel's voice. Her husband was in a hospital, and she'd been drinking champagne while looking at sculptures. Guilt stabbed through her. Then something else. Something she didn't want to examine too closely. Relief? No. That wasn't right. That was her mind misfiring under stress. But the thought had arrived, unbidden and unwelcome, and now it sat in her consciousness like an uncomfortable guest. If something happened to him, she pushed it away, focused on driving, on getting there, on doing what a wife was supposed to do. In moments like this, be present, be supportive, be devastated. She could do that. She'd been performing for 8 years. What was one more performance? Cedars-Sinai's trauma wing was controlled chaos. Miranda was directed to a private waiting area reserved for families of critical patients. A social worker met her, soft-voiced, practiced at delivering bad news gently. "Mrs. Coleman, your husband is in surgery. He sustained significant trauma, head injury, broken ribs, internal bleeding. The surgical team is addressing the most critical issues first. Is he going to die?" The social worker hesitated. "The next 24 hours are critical. Dr. Morrison will speak with you as soon as possible." Miranda nodded mechanically. "Can I see him?" "Not while he's in surgery, but we'll take you to him the moment he's stable." She was led to a private room with comfortable chairs and muted lighting, the kind of space designed to soften horror. A television mounted on the wall showed news coverage with the sound off. She saw the wreckage, saw her husband's Tesla crushed against the barrier, saw the headline, "Billionaire CEO fighting for life after PCH crash." Her phone buzzed, text messages flooding in. Friends, acquaintances, business associates, everyone performing their own version of concern. She responded to none of them. Instead, she sat in the chair and stared at the wall, and waited for whatever came next. 3 hours later, Dr. Morrison appeared. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes and surgical scrubs still damp from washing. He sat across from her, hands clasped, expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Coleman, your husband survived the surgery. We've stabilized the internal bleeding and addressed the fractures. However, he's suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. We've induced a medical coma to reduce swelling and allow his brain to heal." "What does that mean?" "It means we've sedated him deeply. He's on a ventilator. His body is healing, but his brain needs time. When we reduce the sedation, probably in 3 to 5 days, we'll assess his neurological function. Will he wake up?" Dr. Morrison met her eyes. "We don't know. TBI outcomes vary significantly. Some patients recover fully. Others experience deficits, cognitive, motor, behavioral, and some," he paused, "some don't wake up at all." The words hung in the air between them. "Can I see him?" "Yes, but I want to prepare you. He doesn't look like himself. The machines, the tubes, the swelling. It's traumatic for family members." Miranda nodded. "I understand." She didn't. Room 417 was dim, quiet except for the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator and the steady beep of monitors. James lay in the hospital bed, and Dr. Morrison was right. He didn't look like himself. His face was swollen, bruised along the left side where something had struck him. A breathing tube protruded from his mouth, taped in place. IV lines ran from both arms. Bandages wrapped his head. Monitors tracked his heartbeat, oxygen levels, intracranial pressure. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable, human, in a way he never had before. Miranda approached slowly, her heels silent on the linoleum. She stood beside the bed, looking down at the man she'd married 9 years ago. James Coleman, the architect of flow, the man who controlled a logistics empire but couldn't control the rain on PCH. A nurse entered to check vitals, a woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and efficient movements. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm Rachel Moore. I'll be one of your husband's primary nurses during night shifts. If you need anything, just press the call button." "Thank you." Rachel adjusted an IV line, noted something on her tablet, then left quietly. Miranda was alone with her husband. She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, reached out hesitantly and touched his hand. It was warm, alive, but utterly still. "James," she whispered. "Can you hear me?" No response. No flutter of eyelids. No squeeze of fingers. Just machines breathing for him, and monitors tracking a life that existed but didn't respond. She sat there for 20 minutes, saying nothing, her mind circling thoughts she didn't want to have. Finally, she leaned close enough that no one outside the room could hear, close enough that only James, if he could somehow hear, would know what she said. "If you don't wake up," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ventilator's rhythm, "at least I'll finally breathe." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Honest. Terrible. True. She pulled back, startled by her own confession, looked at his face, searching for any sign that he'd heard. Nothing. Of course, nothing. He was unconscious, sedated, unreachable. She stood, smoothing her dress, composing herself. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said, louder now, performing for anyone who might be listening. Then she left room 417, heels clicking down the hallway, past nurses and doctors and other families in various states of grief. She didn't look back. Inside the room, the machines continued their work. Heart rate, steady. Blood pressure, stable. Oxygen saturation, 98%. And deep inside James Coleman's mind, behind the chemical fog of sedation and the swelling of trauma, something registered. A whisper, a confession, a truth that would change everything. James Coleman existed in layers. The deepest layer was pain, a constant, dull throb radiating from his ribs, his head, his left arm. It didn't spike or crescendo. It simply was. Like gravity, like breathing, like the weight of existence itself. Above that was awareness, not full consciousness, but something hovering just beneath it, the knowledge that he existed, that his body occupied space, that time was passing even if he couldn't measure it. And above that, most disturbing of all, was hearing. He heard everything. Doctors discussing intracranial pressure, nurses adjusting IV drips, the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator forcing oxygen into his lungs, the beep of monitors tracking a heart that beat without his permission. At first, he thought he was dreaming, some morphine-induced hallucination where reality bled into unconsciousness. But dreams didn't have this kind of consistency. Dreams didn't maintain the same monotonous soundtrack of medical machinery hour after hour. He tried to move, commanded his fingers to curl, his eyes to open, his mouth to form words around the tube lodged in his throat. Nothing responded. His body had become a prison. His mind was awake, alert, processing, but the connection between thought and action had been severed. Panic arrived like a wave. Wake up, move, do something, scream, but his body remained still, betraying him with absolute indifference. He couldn't even control his breathing. The machine did it for him, inflating his lungs on a preset rhythm, mechanical and precise. He was a passenger in his own body, a consciousness trapped inside meat that no longer obeyed. The panic intensified. His heart rate spiked. He couldn't feel it, but he heard the monitor's beeping accelerate. Immediately, footsteps. A nurse entered. "Mr. Coleman," a woman's voice, calm and professional. "Your heart rate is elevated. That's normal after surgery. You're safe. You're at Cedars-Sinai. You were in an accident, but you're going to be okay." The words were meant to soothe. They did the opposite. "I can hear you. I'm awake. Help me." But his body gave no signal, no twitch, no eye movement, nothing. The nurse checked his vitals, adjusted something on the IV pole, then left. James was alone again, alone with the horrible realization that he was conscious in a way no one expected, that he'd woken from sedation, or had never fully succumbed to it, and now existed in a nightmare where his mind screamed, but his body remained silent. How long had he been like this? Hours, days. He had no reference point, no way to measure time, except by the rhythm of voices and footsteps and shift changes. He tried to remember the accident. Fragments returned, rain, spinning, impact, then another impact, then darkness. But not death. Never death. Just this. This awareness, without agency. This consciousness, without control. Another thought arrived. More disturbing than panic. What if this is permanent? Locked-in syndrome. He'd read about it years ago, patients fully conscious but unable to move or communicate, trapped inside their bodies for years, sometimes decades. A living death sentence. No. He forced the thought away. This was temporary. It had to be. The doctors were sedating him deliberately. When they reduced the drugs, he'd wake up properly. He'd move. He'd speak. He'd return to his life. He just had to wait, and listen. The first day, if it was a day passed in a blur of medical sounds and muffled conversations, doctors came and went, discussing his condition in clinical terms that James strained to understand. Phrases like ICP stable, and sedation protocol, and neurological assessment pending. They spoke around him, about him, never to him. He was an object, a problem to be solved, not a person who could hear every word. Daniel arrived sometime later. James recognized his brother's voice, immediately tight with worry, demanding answers. When will he wake up? We're keeping him sedated for now, a doctor replied. His brain needs time to heal. We'll start reducing sedation in 3 to 5 days and assess his responsiveness. But he will wake up. A pause. The kind of pause that said more than words. We're cautiously optimistic, Mr. Coleman, but traumatic brain injuries are unpredictable. We won't know the extent of his recovery until he regains consciousness. Daniel's voice cracked. He's the strongest person I know. If anyone can beat this, it's James. James wanted to respond, wanted to tell his brother he was right here, listening, aware, but his body remained a traitor. Daniel stayed for an hour, talking to him even though he believed James couldn't hear. He talked about the business, about calls he'd fielded from board members, about how everyone was praying for recovery. Miranda's handling it as well as can be expected, Daniel said, and James detected something in his tone. Skepticism, disapproval. She's been here, doing the wife thing. He trailed off. I just wish you'd wake up soon. We need you. Footsteps. Daniel leaving. Silence again. James floated in the dark, processing what he'd heard. Daniel's concern was genuine. His love, unmistakable. But that comment about Miranda doing the wife thing lingered like a question mark. She came that evening. James knew it was her before she spoke. He recognized the particular rhythm of her footsteps, the faint scent of her perfume, something expensive and floral that she'd worn for years. The nurse acknowledged her. Mrs. Coleman. He's stable. No changes since this morning. Thank you. The nurse left. Miranda's footsteps approached the bed. She stood there for a long moment, silent. James strained to sense her presence. Was she looking at him? Crying? Praying? Then her hand touched his. Warm. Familiar. James, she said softly. It's me. I know. I'm here. I can hear you. Everyone's asking about you. The board, the media, friends. I've been fielding calls all day. Simone keeps offering to bring food. Daniel's flying back to Atlanta tomorrow to handle things there. She spoke in the tone people use when they don't expect a response. Filling silence. Performing the ritual of presence. The doctors say you need time, that your brain is healing. They're optimistic. A pause. I hope they're right. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she leaned close. Very close. Close enough that her breath warmed his cheek, and she whispered something that shattered James's reality. If you don't wake up, at least I'll finally breathe. The words hit him like a second accident. Not grief, not love, not fear. Relief. His wife, the woman he'd married, built a life with, shared a home with for 8 years, had just confessed that his unconsciousness would be a release. James's mind reeled. Had he misheard? Misunderstood? No. The words were clear, deliberate, intimate. She wanted him gone. Not dead, necessarily. Just not awake, not present, not occupying space in her life. The betrayal was so absolute, so unexpected, that for a moment James forgot he couldn't move. He tried to respond, to demand an explanation, to do something. His body remained still. Miranda pulled back, her hand leaving his. She stood there a moment longer, then spoke again, louder now, for any nurse who might overhear. "I love you, James. Come back to me." Then she left. The door clicked shut. James lay in the dark, machines breathing for him, monitors tracking his heart rate, which had spiked, though no one would investigate why. His wife's words echoed in his mind. "If you don't wake up, at least I'll finally breathe." He'd spent 8 years married to this woman, shared meals, vacations, a bed, built a life around her presence, and she'd just told his unconscious body that his absence would be a gift. The panic returned, but different now. Not the panic of being trapped, the panic of realizing he was trapped with someone who wanted him gone. The hours that followed were the longest of James's life. He couldn't sleep, wasn't sure if what he experienced was sleep or simply deeper sedation. But conscious or not, his mind replayed Miranda's words endlessly. "At least I'll finally breathe." What did that mean? Had he suffocated her somehow? Been too controlling, too absent, too focused on business? He'd always thought their marriage was fine, not perfect, but functional. They had freedom, space, mutual respect, or so he'd thought. But people don't whisper relief over their spouse's unconsciousness unless something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. How long had she felt this way? Years, months, and more terrifying. What would she do now? If she believed he'd never wake up, what decisions would she make? What changes would she implement? James had always controlled his life through preparation and planning. Every contingency mapped, every risk assessed. But he'd never prepared for this, being conscious while everyone believed he wasn't. Being aware while decisions were made around him. Being trapped while his wife whispered truths she'd never say to his waking face. A new thought formed, darker and more strategic. If I wake up now, she'll know I heard. And if she knew he'd heard, what then? Apologies? Explanations? Or would she double down? Gaslight him? Claim he'd misunderstood? No. If he woke up now, she'd adapt, adjust, cover. But if he stayed silent, if he pretended to remain unconscious, then he'd hear everything. Every conversation, every plan, every truth spoken in the presence of someone who couldn't respond. The thought was calculating, cold, the kind of strategic thinking that had built Coleman Global Logistics. But this wasn't business. This was his marriage, his life. Still, James understood something fundamental about power. The most dangerous position isn't the one everyone can see. It's the one nobody expects. And right now, nobody expected him to be listening. So he made a decision, one that would define everything that followed. He would stay silent. He would listen. He would wait for the truth to expose itself. And when he finally opened his eyes, he'd do it with full knowledge of who Miranda Coleman really was. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he deserved to know what he'd been living with all these years. And because sometimes, the only way to survive betrayal is to see it coming. Miranda Coleman discovered something unsettling in the days following James's accident. Grief was exhausting, even when it was mostly performance. She sat in the hospital waiting room on day 3, surrounded by flower arrangements too large for the space. Lilies, roses, orchids, condolence bouquets from board members, business partners, and society friends who probably had assistants handle the orders. Her phone buzzed continuously. Texts, calls, emails. Everyone wanted updates. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone wanted to be part of the narrative, praying for James. "Stay strong, Miranda. Let us know if you need anything." She responded with practiced grace. "Thank you so much. We're staying hopeful. James is strong." The words flowed automatically, like reading from a script she'd memorized without trying. Because that's what this was, a performance. The devoted wife in crisis. She'd stepped into the role the moment Daniel called, and now she had to maintain it. Until, what? Until James woke up? Until he didn't? The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. Simone appeared with coffee, real coffee from Intelligentsia, not the hospital cafeteria's burnt offerings. "You look exhausted," Simone said, settling into the chair beside her. "I am. Have you slept?" "A few hours." Miranda sipped the coffee gratefully. Hard to sleep when your husband might die. The words came out harsher than intended. Simone's expression softened with sympathy that Miranda didn't entirely deserve. The doctors are optimistic, right? They're cautiously optimistic, which means they have no idea. Miranda exhaled. They're reducing his sedation today. They'll see if he responds. And if he doesn't? Miranda met her friend's eyes. Then we wait longer. Or we don't. I don't know. Simone squeezed her hand. You're handling this incredibly well. Was she? From the outside, maybe. But inside, Miranda felt like she was balancing on a wire, pretending the fall wouldn't shatter her. Or would it? That was the question she couldn't answer honestly, even to herself. The media attention was relentless. By day 4, James Coleman's accident had become a national story. Not just business news, human interest. The self-made billionaire, the philanthropist, the man who'd built an empire on integrity, now fighting for his life. TMZ ran footage of the crash site. CNBC did a segment on Coleman Global Logistics and its uncertain future. Forbes updated its billionaire rankings with an asterisk beside James's name. And through it all, Miranda became a figure of sympathy and speculation. How is she holding up? Will she take over the company? What happens to the empire if he doesn't survive? Reporters camped outside Cedars-Sinai. Miranda hired security to escort her between her car and the hospital entrance. Photographers shouted questions she ignored. Mrs. Coleman, how is your husband? Miranda, are you prepared to run the company? Any message for the public? She said nothing. Let her lawyers handle press releases. Let Daniel manage board communications. She focused on being present, visible, appropriately devastated. The performance exhausted her. Daniel returned from Atlanta on day 5. He looked worse than she did, unshaven, rumpled, eyes bloodshot from the red-eye flight. But he went straight to James's room, barely acknowledging Miranda in the waiting area. She followed after a respectful interval. Room 417 was brighter now. Morning light filtered through the blinds. James looked the same, bruised, swollen, intubated. The machines continued their monotonous rhythm. Daniel stood beside the bed, one hand on James's shoulder. Hey, brother, he said quietly. I'm back. Business is handled. Atlanta's running smooth. Chicago's ahead of projections. You'd be proud. He paused, waiting for a response that wouldn't come. You need to wake up, James. We need you. I need you. Miranda watched from the doorway, something uncomfortable twisting in her chest. Daniel's grief was so raw, so genuine. He loved his brother, absolutely. And what did she feel? Guilt? Exhaustion? Something that might be worry but felt more like impatience. She pushed the thought away. Daniel noticed her. Morning. She entered the room. Any changes? No. Nurse said they're reducing sedation today. We'll see if he responds. Dr. Morrison mentioned that yesterday. Yeah. Daniel rubbed his face. I hate this. The waiting. The not knowing. Me too. He looked at her then. Really looked. And Miranda saw something in his expression she didn't like. Assessment. Judgment. You holding up okay? He asked. But the question felt loaded, as well as can be expected. Right. He turned back to James. I'm staying in town until he wakes up. Already booked a room at the Four Seasons. You can stay at the house? No. The word came out too quickly. Thanks, but I need space to work. Board's going crazy, and I'm fielding acquisitions offers we didn't ask for. Vultures circle fast. Miranda stiffened. Acquisition offers, competitors smelling blood. Don't worry, I'm shutting them down. But it shows how fragile this is. James is Coleman Global. Without him, Daniel trailed off. Without him, the company continues, Miranda said. He built it to last. Maybe. But investors care about leadership. And right now, our leader is unconscious. The words hung heavy. The board meeting is Tuesday, Daniel continued. They'll want answers. Plans. Contingencies. What kind of contingencies? Daniel met her eyes. Succession plans. Emergency protocols. What happens if James doesn't wake up in the next 30 days? Or 60? Or ever? He'll wake up. I believe that. But the board needs certainty. And if they don't get it, they'll create their own. He softened slightly. I'm not trying to be cold. I'm trying to protect what James built. That's what he'd want. Miranda nodded, understanding the subtext. Daniel didn't trust her to protect anything. Later that afternoon, Dr. Morrison gathered them for an update. They sat in a conference room, Miranda, Daniel, and Dr. Morrison, with his tablet and tired professionalism. We've reduced Mr. Coleman's sedation significantly, the doctor said. His body is responding well. Vitals are stable. Swelling is decreasing. We're optimistic that he'll regain consciousness within the next 48 to 72 hours. And then what? Daniel asked. We assess neurological function. Can he move, speak, recognize faces, follow commands? The next week will tell us whether he's suffered permanent cognitive or motor deficits. What's your best case scenario? Full recovery. He wakes up, undergoes physical therapy, returns home in 2 to 3 weeks. Worst case. Dr. Morrison hesitated. Persistent vegetative state, minimal consciousness, severe cognitive impairment. It's too early to predict with certainty. Miranda felt the room tilt slightly. How soon will you know? Within a week of him regaining consciousness, if he regains it. And if he doesn't? The doctor's expression was carefully neutral. Then we continue supportive care and reassess weekly. Some patients take months to emerge from coma. Others never do. Silence filled the room. Daniel spoke first. What can we do? Be present. Talk to him. Familiar voices can help. Beyond that, we wait. That evening, Miranda returned to the Brentwood estate for the first time in days. The house felt enormous, empty. James's office sat dark and unused. His coffee mug still sat beside the espresso machine, unwashed from the morning of the accident. She stood in the kitchen, staring at it. 6 days ago, James had made coffee, read the paper, driven to Long Beach. 6 days ago, their life had been predictable, manageable, suffocating in its routine. And now, everything hung suspended. If James woke up, life would resume. The performance would continue. The marriage would endure functional, parallel, loveless, but intact. But if he didn't wake up, Miranda poured herself wine and sat in the living room, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Los Angeles. The city glittered below, indifferent to her crisis. Her phone buzzed. A text from her lawyer. Preston Wright. Need to discuss estate matters. Call when you can. She stared at the message. Estate matters. That meant wills, trusts, power of attorney, all the legal machinery that activates when someone hovers between life and death. She'd never thought about it before. Never had to. James was healthy, cautious, invincible in that way. Successful people often are. But accidents happen. And now those estate matters, dusty documents signed years ago, suddenly mattered very much. Miranda set down her wine and called Preston. He answered immediately. Miranda, I'm so sorry about James. How are you holding up? I'm managing. You mentioned estate matters. Yes. I wanted to review James's directives with you. In cases like this, it's important to understand the legal framework. What framework? James designated you as his medical power of attorney. If he becomes unable to make decisions, you'll make them on his behalf. Something cold settled in Miranda's stomach. What kind of decisions? Treatment options, resuscitation orders, long-term care. If he remains unconscious for an extended period, you'll determine his care plan in consultation with doctors. And if he never wakes up, Preston paused. Then you'll decide whether to continue life support indefinitely or transition to comfort care. The euphemism was clear. I'm not making that decision, Miranda said quickly. You won't have to, not now. But if months pass with no improvement, doctors will ask for guidance. I want you prepared. What about the business? James's will stipulates that his shares transfer to you upon death. But if he's incapacitated rather than deceased, the board retains operational control. You'd inherit only if he dies. The words landed heavily. I don't want to inherit, Miranda said. I want him to wake up. Of course. I'm just clarifying the legal reality. You're in a difficult position, Miranda. If James remains unconscious long-term, you'll face pressure from multiple directions. Medical, legal, financial. I'm here to help navigate that. Thank you. They spoke for a few more minutes, logistics, paperwork, contingencies, then hung up. Miranda sat in the dark living room, wine glass empty, mind racing. Medical power of attorney, treatment decisions, life support. She hadn't asked for this power, hadn't wanted it, but she had it, and that changed everything. Rachel Moore had been a trauma nurse for 11 years, and she'd learned to read patients the way some people read books carefully, looking for details others missed. James Coleman was one of those details. On her 7th consecutive night shift in room 417, Rachel noticed something odd. Nothing dramatic, just a flicker, a pattern that didn't fit the expected profile of a deeply sedated patient. His heart rate spiked at specific times, usually when visitors were present, but not consistently, only during certain conversations. She'd dismissed it initially. Heart rate variability was normal in ICU patients. Stress responses, medication interactions, autonomic fluctuations. Nothing alarming. But tonight, watching the monitors while Mrs. Coleman visited, Rachel saw it again. Miranda was speaking softly, holding James's hand, performing the ritual of spousal devotion, and James's heart rate was steady, controlled. Then Miranda leaned close and whispered something Rachel couldn't hear. The heart monitor spiked, not dramatically, just 15 beats per minute faster, then settled back down when Miranda pulled away. Rachel frowned. She waited until Mrs. Coleman left, then approached James's bedside, checked his chart, reviewed medication levels. Everything was normal, except that spike. "Mr. Coleman," she said quietly, "if you can hear me, I need you to know something. You're safe, you're healing, and whatever you're processing in there, you're not alone." She didn't expect a response, didn't get one, but as she left the room, she made a mental note to watch more carefully. Daniel Coleman noticed something different. On day 8, sitting beside his brother's bed, he was talking about the Chicago expansion when he saw a tiny twitch in James's left hand. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. "James?" "Nothing." He waited, watching his brother's hand. Had he imagined it? No. There it was again. The slightest movement, barely perceptible, but movement nonetheless. "James, if you can hear me, move your hand again." Silence. Stillness. Daniel sat forward. "Come on, brother. I know you're in there. You're too stubborn not to be." Nothing. But Daniel wasn't imagining it. He'd seen movement, which meant something was changing. Either James was beginning to wake, or his body was responding involuntarily as sedation decreased. Either way, it was progress. He pressed the call button. A different nurse appeared, older, efficient, unimpressed by Daniel's excitement. "I think he moved," Daniel said. "His hand. I saw it twitch." The nurse checked the monitors, examined James's hand, noted something on her tablet. "Could be involuntary muscle response. We're reducing sedation, so it's not unusual. But it could mean he's waking up. Possibly. Dr. Morrison will assess him in the morning." She left. Daniel stayed, watching his brother intently, hoping for another sign. It didn't come, but Daniel knew what he'd seen, and more importantly, he knew James. His brother was a fighter. If anyone could claw their way back from this, it was James. He just needed time. Rachel's curiosity intensified over the next 2 nights. She began documenting patterns. James's heart rate spikes correlated with specific visitors, Mrs. Coleman's whispers, the lawyer's visit, certain phone conversations Daniel had in the room, but not with medical procedures, not with routine care, not with neutral visitors like the chaplain or social worker, only with emotionally charged moments, which suggested something Rachel had seen before, but never this clearly. James Coleman might be more aware than anyone realized. She'd read about locked-in syndrome. Rare, but documented. Patients fully conscious but unable to move or communicate, trapped inside their bodies while the world assumed they were vegetative. It was every nightmare scenario combined. But if James was locked in, that changed everything. Treatment, prognosis, legal considerations. He wouldn't just be a patient, he'd be a prisoner in his own body, unable to advocate for himself. Rachel needed more evidence before raising alarms. Doctors didn't appreciate nurses suggesting diagnoses, especially complex ones. She had to be certain, so on night 10, she tried something different. Alone in the room with James, she spoke clearly. "Mr. Coleman, I'm going to say 2 words. If you can hear me, I need you to try, really try to increase your heart rate when I say the second word. Not the first, the second. Do you understand?" She paused, watching the monitor. First word, ocean. His heart rate remained steady. Second word, boardroom. The monitor spiked, just slightly, but definitively. Rachel's breath caught. She tried again. 2 more words. Respond to the second. First word, baseball. Steady. Second word, Miranda. Spike. Rachel stepped back, mind racing. James Coleman could hear. He was conscious, and he was deliberately modulating his autonomic responses to communicate, which meant he'd been awake this entire time. Listening, processing, trapped. She needed to tell Dr. Morrison, but if she did, they'd wake him fully, remove the ventilator, start aggressive rehabilitation. And based on those heart rate spikes when Miranda's name was mentioned, Rachel suspected James had a reason for staying silent, a reason he might not want exposed prematurely. She faced an ethical dilemma: tell the doctors and potentially disrupt whatever James was learning, or stay quiet and let him continue. What? Spying on his own life? Rachel looked at the man in the bed, broken, vulnerable, but somehow still in control. "I don't know what you're doing," she whispered, "but I hope you know what you're doing." She left the room without filing a report. Daniel's suspicions grew independently. Over lunch with Coleman Global's CFO, Marcus Webb, Daniel raised concerns he hadn't voiced to anyone else. "Has Miranda been in touch about business matters?" Daniel asked. Marcus shook his head. "Not since the accident." "Why?" "Just wondering how involved she wants to be. In operations, Miranda's never shown interest." "Right. But things change when your husband's in a coma." Marcus studied him. "You think she'll try to take control?" "I think she has medical power of attorney, and lawyers, and a lot of money if James doesn't survive." "Jesus, Daniel, he's not dead." "I know. But succession planning isn't morbid, it's responsible. And right now, we're one medical decision away from complete chaos." Marcus leaned back. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we prepare. Quietly. If James wakes up, great. If he doesn't, or if he's permanently impaired, we need a plan that doesn't involve Miranda suddenly controlling a logistics empire she doesn't understand. That's cold. That's reality. James built this company. I'm not letting it fall apart, because we were too polite to plan for disaster." Marcus nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "Legal review of the corporate structure. Contingencies for board action. If James is incapacitated, long term. And eyes on Miranda's legal team. I want to know if they're positioning for anything aggressive." Done. They finished lunch with careful optimism, but Daniel's mind remained dark with possibilities. He loved his brother, believed in his recovery, but he didn't trust Miranda. And trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. On night 12, Rachel made her decision. She couldn't tell Dr. Morrison, not yet, but she could do something else. She could protect James. After her shift, she created a personal log, handwritten, dated, detailed. Every heart rate spike, every pattern, every moment that suggested consciousness. If James was aware, he'd need an advocate, someone who documented the truth while others made assumptions. Rachel didn't know why James was choosing to remain silent. Maybe he was too weak. Maybe the sedation was still too heavy. Or maybe, and this was the possibility that kept her up during her off hours, maybe he was protecting himself. From what? She couldn't say. But Rachel had worked trauma long enough to know. Sometimes the most dangerous wounds weren't the ones you could see. Miranda's patience was eroding. 2 weeks had passed since the accident, and James remained unresponsive despite decreased sedation. Dr. Morrison was cautiously hopeful. Daniel was staying positive, and the board was monitoring the situation. Empty phrases, meaningless platitudes. What she needed was certainty, direction, an end to the suspended animation. that had become her life. She sat in Preston Wright's office on day 15, surrounded by mahogany furniture and legal degrees that projected competence, but offered little comfort. "Walk me through this again," Miranda said. "If James remains in this state indefinitely, what are my options?" Preston folded his hands, lawyer hands, smooth and deliberate. "You have medical power of attorney. That means you direct his care in consultation with physicians. But legally, James is still alive. You can't access his estate or take control of the business unless he's declared incompetent, which requires a formal legal process. How long does that take? Months. You'd need psychiatric evaluation, legal hearings, judge's approval. It's not fast. And if he dies," Preston's expression remained neutral, "then you inherit according to his will. But we're not there." "I know we're not there. I'm asking hypothetically. Hypothetically, you'd become one of the wealthiest women in America. Coleman Global shares, real estate, investments roughly $8 billion. The number hung in the air. Miranda had always known James was wealthy, but hearing it quantified, knowing it could transfer to her, made it suddenly concrete. $8 billion. Freedom. Independence. Power. She pushed the thought away. "I don't want his money. I want him to wake up." Preston said nothing, which was its own kind of response. "But if he doesn't," Miranda continued, "I need to understand the timeline. If James remains like this for months, years, what happens? You direct his care, pay for his treatment from his accounts you have access as power of attorney. Live your life. Eventually, if there's no improvement, you might consider. Consider what? Withdrawing life support. Transitioning to comfort care. It's not a decision anyone wants to make. But if years pass with no consciousness, no quality of life, sometimes families choose to let go." Miranda felt something cold settle in her chest. "How would that work?" "You'd consult with doctors. They'd assess whether continued treatment serves any purpose. If they agree there's no reasonable chance of recovery, you could authorize removal of the ventilator and feeding tubes. Death would follow naturally within days." "Naturally. Yes, except it's not natural. It's chosen." Preston met her eyes. "It's compassionate. No one wants to keep a loved one trapped in suffering indefinitely." Miranda stood, pacing to the window. Los Angeles sprawled below, indifferent to her crisis. "I'm not making that decision," she said. "Not now. Of course not. But I want you prepared. If months pass, doctors will raise this conversation. You'll face pressure from the board, from family, from medical staff. Better to think through your position now than react emotionally later." Miranda turned back. "The board wants him dead, don't they? They want certainty. Dead or recovered either works. It's the liminal state that's problematic." "Liminal. That's a nice word for living hell." Preston didn't argue. Miranda left his office with more questions than answers, her mind churning through scenarios she didn't want to imagine. Daniel confronted her 2 days later. They were in the hospital cafeteria, neutral ground, public enough to keep things civil. "I got a call from our legal team," Daniel said without preamble. "Apparently, you've been discussing contingencies with your lawyer." Miranda kept her expression neutral. "So have you. Mine are about business continuity. Yours are about estate planning. I have medical power of attorney. I'm preparing for difficult decisions." "Like what?" "Pulling the plug." Miranda's eyes flashed. "Like understanding my legal responsibilities. James is unconscious, Daniel. Someone has to think about what happens. If he stays that way, he's going to wake up. You don't know that. The doctors don't know that. We're all just hoping and pretending that hope is a strategy." Daniel leaned forward. "You want him to die." The accusation hung between them, sharp and ugly. Miranda's voice dropped to ice. "I want him to either recover or not. I want certainty. I want to stop living in this nightmare, where every day is the same and nothing changes." "So you're planning for his death." "I'm planning for reality, which someone has to do since you're all busy performing optimism. We're being loyal. You're being naive." They stared at each other, the rift between them now openly acknowledged. "If you do anything to hurt him," Daniel said quietly, "I'll destroy you. And if he never wakes up, what then?" Do we keep him on machines for years, decades? Is that what you want? I want my brother back. So do I. The lie came easily. But I'm not going to pretend there aren't hard decisions ahead. Someone has to be realistic. Daniel stood. Stay away from the doctors unless I'm there. I don't trust you to make medical decisions alone. You don't have authority. I'm his brother. I have standing. And if I suspect you're making choices that aren't in James's best interest, I'll get a judge involved. Test me. He walked away, leaving Miranda alone with her coffee and her growing awareness that Daniel was now an obstacle. That evening, Miranda made a decision. She contacted Dr. Morrison directly, scheduling a private meeting without Daniel present. They met in his office the next morning. "Mrs. Coleman, how can I help?" Miranda settled into the chair across from him. "I need your honest assessment. Not the hopeful version you give me in front of Daniel. The real one." Dr. Morrison leaned back. "All right. Honestly, I'm concerned. We've reduced James's sedation to minimal levels. Most patients at this point show some responsiveness, eye movement, hand gripping, vocal attempts. James shows none of that. What does that mean? It could mean the brain injury is more severe than we initially assessed. Or it could mean he needs more time. TBI recovery isn't linear. But you're concerned." "I am." Miranda absorbed this. "If he doesn't improve in the next week, 2 weeks, what's your recommendation?" "We continue supportive care, monitor for changes. But if months pass with no progress, we'd need to have difficult conversations about long-term options, like withdrawing support. In extreme cases, yes, but we're not there, not even close. But we could be." Dr. Morrison studied her. "Mrs. Coleman, I understand this is overwhelming, but James is stable. His body is healing. Consciousness may return, we simply can't predict when. Or if, Miranda stood. "I want daily updates. Direct to me. If anything changes anything, I want to know immediately." "Of course." She left, feeling both relieved and unsettled. Dr. Morrison was concerned. That gave her justification. If James didn't improve, she could point to medical opinion when making hard decisions. Decisions Daniel wouldn't approve. But Daniel didn't have power of attorney. She did. In room 417, machines continued their work. James heard everything. Miranda's meeting with Preston, her conversation with Daniel, her private session with Dr. Morrison. Every word, every implication, every truth revealed when people believed he couldn't hear. His wife wasn't grieving. She was calculating. She wasn't hoping for recovery. She was planning for his death, and she had the legal authority to make it happen. James's heart rate spiked. And this time, Rachel Moore wasn't the only one who noticed. Dr. Morrison, reviewing charts remotely, saw the anomaly and made a note. Patient, showing increased autonomic responses. Query underlying consciousness. But he didn't investigate further. Not yet. Because in medicine, as in life, seeing what you don't expect requires looking harder than most people are willing to. And James Coleman was counting on that. Rachel Moore broke protocol on night 19. She entered room 417 at 2:47 a.m., the dead hour when even hospitals fell into uneasy quiet, and locked the door behind her. James lay as he always did, motionless, except for the mechanical rise and fall of his chest. The monitors traced their familiar patterns, indifferent to the drama unfolding around their subject. Rachel pulled a chair close to the bed and spoke quietly. "Mr. Coleman, I know you can hear me. I've been tracking your heart rate for 2 weeks. You respond to specific stimuli names, topics, voices. You're conscious." She paused, watching the monitor. His heart rate increased by 12 beats per minute. "I should tell Dr. Morrison. It's my duty. But I haven't, because I think you're choosing to stay silent, and I think you have a reason." Another spike, 14 beats this time. "So here's what I'm going to tell you. Your wife met with Dr. Morrison yesterday. She asked about withdrawing life support. She's positioning herself to make that decision if you don't show improvement soon." The monitor jumped 20-beat spike. "Your brother suspects something. He's been arguing with her, threatening legal action. But she has power of attorney. Legally, she can override him." The numbers climbed higher, approaching tachycardia territory. I don't know what's happening in your marriage. That's not my business. But I need you to understand the stakes. If you stay silent much longer, you might not get the chance to speak. Rachel stood, prepared to leave, when she saw it. His right index finger moved, just slightly, a twitch, a curl, barely perceptible, but intentional. Can you do that again? She whispered. The finger moved, definitive, controlled. Rachel's pulse quickened. Mr. Coleman, if you can hear me and understand me, move that finger twice. 2 movements. Slow, deliberate. Jesus, Rachel breathed. Okay. Listen carefully. I can't keep this secret much longer. If I suspect you're conscious and don't report it, I lose my license. But I also won't let you be unplugged before you're ready to defend yourself. She pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app. I'm going to document this. Time, date, witnessed voluntary movement. I'm filing it with the charge nurse tomorrow morning. That starts the process: neurological assessment, updated scans, new treatment protocols. They'll know you're aware. James's heart rate was elevated but steady now. Processing. Is that what you want? Rachel asked. Or do you need more time? The finger didn't move. Rachel understood. He wasn't ready. Whatever he was waiting for hadn't happened yet. I'm giving you 48 hours, she said firmly. 2 days. After that, I report what I've seen. I can't ethically wait longer, no matter what you're trying to accomplish. 1 finger movement. Acknowledgement. Rachel left the room, her hands trembling slightly. She'd just made a choice that could end her career, but she'd also possibly saved a man's life. The question was, from what? Miranda's impatience manifested in new ways. On day 20, she contacted an attorney, separate from Preston, someone Daniel didn't know about. Marcus Reeves specialized in medical conservatorship and end-of-life decisions. They met at a Beverly Hills restaurant, private table in the back. Mrs. Coleman, thank you for reaching out. Reeves was slick, polished, the kind of lawyer who made moral ambiguity sound reasonable. I understand you're in a difficult position. That's an understatement. Tell me what you're looking for. Miranda sipped her wine, choosing words carefully. My husband has been unconscious for 3 weeks. Medical power of attorney gives me decision-making authority, but his brother is interfering. I need to understand my legal standing if I choose to discontinue aggressive treatment. Discontinue meaning? Withdraw the ventilator. Stop life support. Let nature take its course. Reeves nodded, unfazed. California law allows surrogates with power of attorney to refuse or withdraw treatment if the patient has no reasonable chance of recovery. But you'd need medical consensus. Doctors have to agree that continued intervention is futile. What if they don't? Then you petition the court for a conservatorship. Essentially, you argue that James is unable to make decisions for himself and that you should have legal authority to act in his best interest as you define it. How long does that take? 3 to 6 months, unless you can demonstrate urgency, imminent medical complications, prohibitive costs, emotional toll on family. Miranda leaned forward. And if his brother contests it, then it becomes expensive and public. Family disputes over conservatorship often turn into media circuses. Think Terry Schiavo, husband versus parents, years of litigation, national debate. I don't want that. Then the alternative is waiting. Keep him on life support, hope for improvement, and if none comes, eventually doctors will recommend comfort care themselves. That's cleaner, no legal battle, no public scrutiny. How long? Could be 6 months, could be 2 years. Depends on his stability. Miranda sat back, frustrated. Every option was slow, complicated, uncertain. There is one other consideration, Reeves added carefully. What? If you believe your husband's condition is causing unreasonable suffering not just to him, but to you and the family, you could argue that withdrawing treatment is the compassionate choice. Courts generally side with surrogates who can demonstrate they're acting in good faith, even if the brother disagrees. Even then, you're the spouse. You have legal priority. Miranda absorbed this. What would you need from me? Documentation, medical records, journal entries showing your emotional state, evidence that you've consulted with doctors, considered all options, and concluded that continued treatment doesn't serve James's interests. In other words, build a case. Exactly. Miranda finished her wine. I'll be in touch. Daniel discovered the meeting 3 days later. One of his attorneys had a paralegal who knew someone in Reeves's office. Word traveled through the legal grapevine. Miranda Coleman was shopping for conservatorship counsel. Daniel called an emergency meeting with Marcus Webb and Coleman Global's general counsel, Patricia Voss. She's planning something, Daniel said without preamble. I don't know what, but she's lawyering up. Patricia, a sharp woman in her 50s, reviewed notes on her tablet. Medical power of attorney gives her authority over James's care. If she wants to withdraw life support, she legally can. Not if I fight it. Fighting it means court. And Daniel, you'd lose. She's the spouse. California law favors spouses in these decisions. So what are my options? Limited. You could petition for co-conservatorship shared decision-making authority. But that's hard to get when someone already has POA. There has to be something. Patricia thought for a moment. If you could demonstrate she's acting in bad faith, that she's motivated by inheritance rather than James's welfare, a judge might intervene. But you'd need proof. Substantial proof. Like what? Recorded conversations, financial transactions, communications showing intent to hasten his death for personal gain. It's a high bar. Marcus spoke up. What if James wakes up? All of this becomes moot, which is why she might be trying to move quickly, Daniel said. Before he has the chance. Patricia's expression darkened. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. The room fell silent. Finally, Patricia spoke. I'll have our investigators look into her recent activities. Discreetly. If there's anything concerning, we'll know. Do it fast, Daniel said. I don't think we have much time. On night 21, Rachel returned to room 417 for her final conversation. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing my report, she told James. I've given you the time you asked for. Whatever you're waiting for, I hope you found it. His heart rate spiked, not stress, but something else. Urgency. If you want to stay quiet, you'll need to stop responding to stimuli. No more heart rate changes, no finger movements. Go completely still. Can you do that? One finger movement. Yes. Good. Because once they know you're conscious, everything changes. They'll remove the ventilator, start rehab, bring in neurologists. You'll lose your cover. Rachel paused, then spoke the thing she'd been thinking for days. I don't know what you heard while you were silent, but whatever it was, I hope it was worth it, because you can't unhear it, and that knowledge is going to haunt you. She left without waiting for a response. Behind her, James Coleman lay in the dark, absorbing her warning. She was right. He couldn't unhear what Miranda had said, couldn't unknow what she'd planned. And tomorrow, when Rachel filed her report, the performance would end. But before it did, James had one more thing to learn, because Miranda wasn't done revealing herself, and neither was he done listening. The next morning, before Rachel filed her report, Miranda made her move. She arrived at the hospital early 7 a.m., before Daniel or the day shift doctors. She entered room 417 and closed the door. James heard her approach, felt her presence beside the bed. James, she said softly, it's been 3 weeks. The doctors say you're stable but unresponsive. They don't know if you'll ever wake up. She paused, and James sensed something different in her tone. Finality. I've been thinking about us, about what our marriage was, and I realized something. I was never happy. Not really. You were always working, always building, always somewhere else. I was just the woman in your house. Her hand touched his, but there was no warmth in it. I think it's time to let you go. Not because I'm cruel, but because this machine's breathing for you, keeping you alive when maybe you're already gone. It's not fair. To you or to me. James's heart rate climbed, but he fought to control it. I'm going to talk to Dr. Morrison today. Ask about transitioning to comfort care. They'll remove the ventilator, stop the interventions. You'll pass peacefully, and I'll finally be free. She leaned close, her whisper barely audible. Thank you for the life you gave me. But I'm ready for the life I'll have without you. She straightened, squeezed his hand once, and walked toward the door. That's when James made his decision. 48 hours had passed since Rachel's warning. He'd heard everything he needed to hear. His wife didn't just want him unconscious, she wanted him dead, and she was moving to make it happen, which meant staying silent was no longer strategic. It was suicidal. As Miranda's hand touched the door handle, James did something he hadn't done in 3 weeks. He moved. Not his finger, not a subtle twitch, his entire arm. It lifted off the bed, slowly, fighting through muscle atrophy and neurological rust, and reached toward her. Miranda turned at the sound, the rustling of sheets, the shift of weight, and she saw her husband's arm extended, his hand open, his eyes were open, staring at her, aware. Miranda's scream echoed through the ICU. The ICU erupted into controlled chaos. Within 90 seconds of Miranda's scream, Dr. Morrison and 3 nurses flooded room 417. Rachel Moore, just arriving for her shift, pushed through the crowd, her heart hammering with a mixture of relief and dread. James Coleman's eyes were open, not the vacant stare of someone emerging from sedation, but focused, intentional, tracking movement. His right arm had fallen back to the bed, but the evidence was clear he'd moved deliberately. He was conscious. Mr. Coleman. Dr. Morrison moved to the bedside, penlight in hand. Can you hear me? Blink if you understand. James blinked. Once. Definitive. Good. I'm Dr. Morrison. You're at Cedars-Sinai. You've been unconscious for 3 weeks following a car accident. You're safe. Do you understand? Another blink. Miranda stood frozen by the door, her face drained of color. Rachel watched her carefully, not with judgment, but with the clinical assessment of someone who'd seen every reaction to medical crises. Miranda didn't look relieved. She looked terrified. We're going to assess your neurological function, Dr. Morrison continued. Can you squeeze my hand? He placed his hand in James's. A moment passed. Then James's fingers closed around the doctor's hand. Excellent. Other hand? James complied. Can you wiggle your toes? Movement beneath the sheets confirmed. Dr. Morrison straightened, cautiously optimistic. Mr. Coleman, you've made remarkable progress. We're going to remove the ventilator and see if you can breathe on your own. It might be uncomfortable, but I need you to stay calm. Blink, if you understand. Blink. The respiratory team arrived. Over the next 20 minutes, they carefully extubated James, removing the breathing tube he'd depended on for weeks. He coughed reflexively, his throat raw, his lungs working to remember their function, but he breathed. On his own. Oxygen through a nasal cannula supplemented his efforts, but he was breathing independently. Dr. Morrison smiled. Mr. Coleman, this is extraordinary. Can you try to speak? James's mouth opened. Nothing emerged at first, just air, rough and shapeless. His vocal cords had been paralyzed by the tube, atrophied by disuse. He tried again. Wah! The sound was barely a whisper, damaged and weak. Water. A nurse brought ice chips. James accepted them gratefully, the cold soothing his ravaged throat. We'll start you on liquids carefully, Dr. Morrison said. Your swallow reflex needs testing, but this is excellent progress. Throughout all of this, Miranda remained by the door, silent, watching her husband return from the dead. Daniel arrived 30 minutes later, having received an urgent call from the hospital. He burst into the room and stopped, seeing his brother awake for the first time in 3 weeks. James. His voice cracked. Jesus Christ, James. He moved to the bedside, gripping James's hand. You're back. You're actually back. James looked at his brother, really looked, and something passed between them. Recognition, relief, understanding. Dan. James's voice was still weak, but clearer now. Good to see you. Don't talk. Save your strength. The doctors say you're doing great. I've been listening. Daniel frowned. What? The whole time. I could hear everything. The room went very still. Dr. Morrison stepped forward. Mr. Coleman, are you saying you were conscious during your coma? Yes. The entire 3 weeks. Most of it. After. The sedation decreased. I could hear. Couldn't move, couldn't respond. But I heard everything. The implications crashed through the room like a second accident. Daniel's expression shifted from relief to something harder. He turned slowly to face Miranda, who'd gone pale. Everything? Daniel asked quietly. James's eyes moved to his wife. Everything. Miranda found her voice. James, I don't understand. You've been unconscious. No. The word came out stronger. Locked in. Aware. Listening. Dr. Morrison interjected. This is called locked-in syndrome, though usually more severe. It's rare but documented. Mr. Coleman, we need to assess the extent of your awareness. Can you tell me what you remember? James's gaze remained on Miranda. I remember. My wife. Visiting. Whispering. Miranda's composure cracked. James, whatever you think you heard, I heard exactly what you said. He paused, gathering strength. If I don't wake up, you'll finally breathe. Silence detonated through the room. Dr. Morrison looked between husband and wife, recognizing the shift from medical crisis to something far more personal. Perhaps we should give Mr. Coleman some rest. No, James said. Everyone stays. His voice was gaining strength with each sentence, fueled by weeks of suppressed words. I heard you. Meet with lawyers. Discuss. Withdrawing. Life support. Plan for my death. Miranda stepped forward. You don't understand the context. I understand perfectly. James's eyes were hard now, clear. You didn't want me to recover. You wanted me gone. Daniel's hand tightened into a fist. Miranda, what the hell did you do? I didn't do anything. Her voice rose, defensive. I was preparing for difficult decisions. That's what power of attorney means. It means protecting him, Daniel snapped. Not planning his funeral. I was trying to be realistic. You were trying to inherit. James cut through the argument. Rachel, the nurse stepped forward. Yes, Mr. Coleman, you knew. You tested me. You gave me time. Rachel nodded slowly. I suspected. Your heart rate patterns, they weren't random. I should have reported it sooner. No, you did exactly right. I needed to hear the truth about who I was married to. Miranda's eyes glistened with tears, real or performed. James couldn't tell any more. James, please, I love you. I was scared and overwhelmed, and you said you'd finally breathe. His voice was quiet now, but devastatingly clear. Those were your words, not mine. Yours. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. The room held its breath. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. I think we should pause this conversation. Mr. Coleman needs rest. His neurological recovery is still fragile. No, James said firmly. Not fragile. Clear. For the first time. In years. He looked at Miranda with something that might have been pity. I heard everything. Your meetings. Your plans. Your relief at my unconsciousness. I know who you are now. What you wanted. James, get out. The words landed like a judge's gavel. James, please. Get out. Miranda stood frozen, tears streaming now, her carefully constructed performance finally crumbling under the weight of exposure. Daniel moved toward her. You heard him. He doesn't understand. He understands perfectly, Daniel said. He's been listening for 3 weeks. To all of it. Every word you said, when you thought he couldn't hear. Miranda looked around the room at James, at Daniel, at Dr. Morrison, at Rachel, searching for an ally, finding none. I'm still your wife, she said desperately. I still have power of attorney. Had, Daniel corrected. The moment James woke up, your authority ended. You're nobody now. Just the woman who wanted him dead. Miranda's face hardened. I won't forget this. Neither will I, James said. And neither will the lawyers. When we discuss divorce, and fraud, and attempted, what's the term? Constructive abandonment. You can't prove. I can prove everything. I heard it. Others witnessed it. Your meetings with Reeves. Your conversations with Preston. All of it. Documented. Miranda realized the trap she'd walked into. Every word she'd spoken in confidence. Every plan she'd made assuming James would never wake up. All of it had been observed by the one person who mattered most. She'd been so certain of his silence that she'd revealed herself completely. And now she'd pay for it. Without another word, Miranda turned and left the room, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. Daniel watched her go, then turned back to his brother. "How much of this did you plan?" James managed something that might have been a smile. "All of it. Once I realized I could hear, I stayed quiet, waited, let her expose who she really was. That's cold. That's survival." Rachel spoke quietly. "Mr. Coleman, what you did was incredibly risky. If she'd moved faster, if she'd withdrawn support before I reported, I know. But I needed the truth. All of it. No ambiguity. No," he said, she said. Just her, in her own words, revealing herself. Dr. Morrison shook his head. "This is the most unusual case I've ever handled." "Unusual," James agreed, "but necessary." He closed his eyes, exhaustion finally catching up to 3 weeks of vigilance. "Can everyone leave now?" "Except Daniel." The medical staff filed out. Rachel paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mr. Coleman, I'm glad you're back. Thank you for protecting me." She nodded and left. Daniel pulled a chair close. "Jesus, James, when you decide to burn a bridge, you really burn it. She wanted me gone. I gave her what she wished for, then took it away. That's cruel, is it?" She whispered her relief. "Over my dying body. While I could hear, while I was fighting, just to keep breathing. She doesn't get forgiveness. She gets consequences." Daniel couldn't argue. "What now?" Daniel asked. "Now?" James opened his eyes, clear and focused. "Now I recover, get strong, go home, and rebuild my life without the woman who wanted me dead. The divorce will be brutal. Good. I've always performed best under pressure, despite everything." Daniel laughed. "You're insane. Maybe. But I'm awake. And that's all that matters." Outside the hospital, Miranda Coleman sat in her Mercedes, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Everything had collapsed. The careful plans, the positioning, the legal strategies, all of it meaningless, now that James was awake and aware. He knew everything. Her phone buzzed. "Preston Wright." "Miranda, I just heard. We need to talk immediately." "About what?" "It's over. It's not over until the legal separation is finalized. But we need to control the narrative. If James moves first, he already has. He was conscious the whole time, Preston. He heard everything. Silence on the line." "Jesus Christ," Preston finally said. "Everything? Everything. Then we have a problem. A big one." Miranda closed her eyes. "Just tell me what to do. Right now. Nothing. Don't contact James. Don't visit the hospital. Don't make any statements. Let me assess the damage. And then we try to minimize the fallout. But Miranda, if he can prove you were planning to withdraw life support for personal gain, you could face legal consequences beyond divorce." "What kind of consequences?" "Civil liability. Maybe criminal, depending on how aggressive he wants to be." Miranda ended the call and sat in the parking garage, the enormity of her situation finally becoming clear. She'd bet everything on James never waking up, and she'd lost. James Coleman spent 4 more weeks at Cedars-Sinai before being cleared for discharge. His recovery was remarkable, faster and more complete than Dr. Morrison predicted. Physical therapy rebuilt atrophied muscles. Speech therapy restored his voice to full strength. Neurological assessments showed no permanent cognitive deficits. He'd survived the accident, survived the coma, survived his wife's betrayal, and he'd emerged stronger than before. Daniel visited daily, managing the business remotely while his brother healed. They talked about logistics, board meetings, quarterly reports, the comfortable territory of brothers who'd built an empire together. But they also talked about Miranda. "She's lawyered up aggressively," Daniel reported during one visit. Preston Wright assembled a team. "They're arguing that her comments were taken out of context, that she was under extreme stress, that no actual harm was done." James, now sitting upright without assistance, shook his head. "The harm was intent. She wanted me dead. Can you prove that in court? I can prove she met with an estate lawyer while I was unconscious. I can prove she discussed withdrawing life support. And I can testify to what she whispered while standing over my bed. Hearsay. Not if I'm the direct witness. Daniel considered this. The divorce will be ugly. Let it be ugly. I've built a career on transparency. I'm not going to start hiding truth now. She'll fight for half of everything. She's entitled to nothing. Prenup was airtight. She only inherits if I die. Since I didn't, she gets what's specified. 5 million and the Brentwood house. That's generous considering she wanted you dead. James smiled without humor. Generosity isn't for her. It's for me. I don't want to spend years in litigation. I want her gone cleanly, quickly, definitively. And if she refuses, then I make everything public. The recordings Rachel documented, the heart rate patterns, my testimony about what I heard. Let the court of public opinion decide. Daniel whistled low. You're colder than I thought. Not cold. Clear. Miranda taught me something valuable. While I was silent, people reveal who they are when they think you can't hear them. I won't forget that lesson. Rachel Moore visited on James's last day at the hospital. I wanted to say goodbye properly, she said, standing in the doorway, and to apologize. For what? For not reporting my suspicions sooner. If I'd told Dr. Morrison earlier, you gave me what I needed most. James interrupted. Time. To listen. To learn. If you'd reported immediately, Miranda would have adjusted, performed, hidden. I never would have known the truth. Rachel nodded slowly. Still, it violated protocols and saved my life. I won't forget that. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a check, $50,000, and a letter of recommendation. Mr. Coleman, I can't accept. You can, and will. Consider it payment for the best surveillance work I've ever commissioned. Unintentional surveillance, but effective nonetheless. Rachel took the envelope, tears in her eyes. What you went through being conscious but trapped, I can't imagine. Neither could I, until I lived it. James met her eyes. You know what I learned? Silence is powerful. When you're quiet, people forget you're listening. They say the truth. They reveal themselves. My whole life I've been talking, negotiating, directing, commanding. But those 3 weeks of silence taught me more about human nature than 50 years of conversation. What did you learn? That love without trust is performance. That patience is strategic. And that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply bear witness. Rachel smiled. Those are hard lessons. The best ones usually are. James returned to the Brentwood estate on a clear afternoon in late November. The house felt different, not in its physical structure, but in its meaning. This had been his home for 8 years. Now it was just a building that happened to contain his belongings. Miranda had already moved out, per legal agreement. She'd taken her clothes, her art, her jewelry. Everything else remained. Daniel helped him inside. You sure you want to stay here? For now. Until I decide what's next. You could sell it. Start fresh somewhere else. James looked around the living room, expensive furniture, curated decor, the aesthetics of a life that had looked perfect from outside. Maybe, but not yet. First I need to rebuild the business, myself. Over the following weeks, James returned to work gradually. At first just an hour a day, then 2, then 4. Board members welcomed him back with genuine relief. Coleman Global had survived his absence, but barely. Daniel had held things together, but the company needed its architect. James addressed the board at his first full meeting back. I know there was uncertainty during my recovery. Speculation about succession, stability, leadership. I want to address that directly. He stood at the head of the table, the same position he'd occupied for 2 decades. I'm back, fully. I've been through hell, but I've emerged stronger, more focused, more committed to the principles this company was built on: integrity, transparency, excellence. He paused, letting the words land. I also want to address my personal situation. Miranda and I are divorcing. That's a matter of public record. What's not public, and won't be unless necessary, is why. But I'll say this. I learned that trust is non-negotiable, in business and in life. Without it, everything else is just performance. The board listened intently. Coleman Global will continue to operate with absolute integrity. Our reputation is our greatest asset. I won't compromise it for convenience, profit, or personal comfort. If that's not the company you want to be part of, I respect that, but that's the company I'm building. No one left. The divorce proceedings were completed in 4 months fast by Billionaire standards. Miranda fought initially, her lawyers arguing for more than the prenup specified. But when James's attorneys began preparing to submit evidence of her conversations, meetings, and plans during his coma, she settled quickly. $5 million. The Brentwood house. Nothing else. James signed the papers without ceremony, handed his marriage away with the same clinical efficiency he'd applied to business deals. Daniel asked if he felt anything. Relief, James answered honestly, and sadness, not for who she was, but for who I thought she was. That person never existed. You going to date again? James laughed. Eventually. But first I need to relearn how to trust. That's harder than physical therapy. Fair enough. They were having lunch at a restaurant in Santa Monica, not far from where the accident had happened. James had driven past the site once, alone, needing to see it. The barrier had been repaired. The road was smooth. Nothing indicated that his life had nearly ended there. Except the memory. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd actually died? Daniel asked. All the time. Miranda would have inherited. The business would have transitioned to the board. Life would have continued without me. That bother you? Not the way you'd think. The world doesn't stop when you die. But knowing who would have benefited from my death, that bothers me. She almost got exactly what she wanted. Except you survived. Except I survived. James sipped his water and learned something she didn't expect. What? That sometimes the best revenge isn't retribution. It's simply outliving someone's plans for you. 6 months after waking up, James gave his first interview, not to business media, to 60 Minutes. The segment aired on a Sunday evening, reaching 20 million viewers. James sat across from the interviewer, calm and articulate, telling a story that sounded like fiction, but was documented fact. Mr. Coleman, you're saying you were conscious the entire time. Not the entire time, but for most of the 3 weeks. Yes, I could hear everything. Couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I was aware. That must have been terrifying. It was, but it was also clarifying. When you can't respond, people reveal who they really are. I learned more about human nature in those 3 weeks than I had in my entire life, including about your wife. Including about my wife. The interviewer leaned forward. She's claimed that her words were taken out of context, that she was under extreme stress and not thinking clearly. James met the camera directly. I don't doubt she was stressed, but stress reveals character. Under pressure, she didn't choose compassion or hope. She chose calculation. That tells me everything I need to know. Do you forgive her? James considered the question. Forgiveness implies she's asked for it. She hasn't. What she's done is hire lawyers to minimize consequences. That's not repentance. That's strategy. So no forgiveness. No anger either. Just clarity. She showed me who she was, and I believe her. The interview made national headlines. Opinion pieces debated medical ethics, spousal duties, power of attorney limitations. But most people focused on the human story. A man who'd survived betrayal by simply staying silent long enough for the truth to expose itself. James didn't read the coverage. He'd said what needed saying. The rest was noise. 1 year after the accident, James Coleman did something unexpected. He stepped down as CEO of Coleman Global Logistics, not out of weakness or retreat, out of evolution. Daniel took over operations. James remained chairman, guiding strategy but not day-to-day management. He'd spent 30 years building the company. Now he wanted to build something else. Himself. He sold the Brentwood estate Too Many Ghosts, bought a smaller place in Malibu with ocean views and space for the life he was constructing. He took up painting, something he'd never considered before. Discovered he had a talent for abstract work colors and forms that didn't need to represent anything except feeling. He dated occasionally, carefully, with a wariness that might fade over time, but served him well now. And he thought a lot about trust, about vulnerability, about the difference between being alone and being isolated. "You seem lighter," Daniel observed during one of their weekly dinners. "I am. Because of the divorce? Because of clarity. For years I was married to someone I didn't really know, living a life that looked successful but felt empty. The accident and everything that followed forced me to confront that. Most people don't survive their wake-up calls. Most people don't get 3 weeks to think about it while pretending to be unconscious." They laughed. It felt good. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked. James considered. "One. I wish I'd listened sooner. To myself. To the doubts I had about Miranda, that I ignored because it was easier than confronting them. I spent years choosing comfort over truth. And now I choose truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then." Rachel Moore received a promotion to head ICU nurse 18 months after James's recovery. James attended her celebration dinner, surprising her with his presence. "You changed the trajectory of my life," he told her. "I wanted to make sure you knew that." "You changed it yourself," Rachel replied. "I just gave you time. Time was exactly what I needed. Thank you." They stayed in touch after that. Not frequently, but enough. She'd check in every few months, ask how he was rebuilding. He'd send donations to the hospital's trauma unit in her name. 2 years later, Rachel wrote a paper for a medical journal about locked-in syndrome and the importance of observing autonomic responses in supposedly unconscious patients. She dedicated it to James. He framed it and hung it in his home office, a reminder that silence can be its own form of survival. 3 years after the accident, James Coleman sat on his Malibu deck, watching the Pacific Ocean reflect sunset colors he'd never appreciated before. His phone buzzed. "Daniel, board meeting went well. Q3 numbers are strong. The Atlanta expansion is ahead of schedule." "Good. You sound distracted." "Just thinking." "About?" James watched the waves roll in, constant and indifferent. "About how close I came to dying without ever really living. I built an empire, married a woman, filled my days with achievement, but I never stopped to ask if any of it made me happy. Does it now? Some of it. The business I'm proud of, the relationship with you I treasure, the art I'm making, the life I'm building that makes me happy. And the rest I'm letting go. Miranda, the betrayal, the anger, I'm done carrying it. She revealed who she was. I survived. That's enough." Daniel was quiet a moment. "You sound at peace." "I am. Finally." "Good. You've earned it." They talked business for a few more minutes, then hung up. James stayed on the deck as darkness fell, the ocean becoming a black mirror reflecting stars. He thought about the moment he'd woken up, the decision to move, to speak, to expose Miranda's betrayal. He could have stayed silent longer, gathered more evidence, inflicted more damage, but he hadn't, because vengeance wasn't the point. Truth was, and once he had the truth, he could let everything else go. A text arrived. Unknown number. "Mr. Coleman, this is Dr. Morrison. I'm giving a lecture on consciousness in coma patients next month. Would you be willing to participate? Your experience could help medical professionals recognize locked-in syndrome earlier." James typed back, "I'd be honored." Another legacy. Not just the business he'd built, but the knowledge he could share, the lives he could help simply by telling his story. The ocean continued its rhythmic work, erasing and rebuilding the shore with every wave. James understood that now. Life was erosion and reconstruction, loss and recovery, silence and speech. He'd been trapped in his body for 3 weeks, forced to listen without responding. But that forced silence had given him something unexpected: perspective. Sometimes you have to be completely powerless to understand where real power lives. Not in control, not in dominance, not in performance, but in clarity, in truth, in the courage to see what is, rather than what you wish were true. James Coleman had survived an accident that should have killed him. He'd survived a betrayal that could have broken him, and he'd emerged not bitter, but wiser, not because he'd defeated his enemies, but because he'd learned the most important lesson of all, that vulnerability, when faced honestly, can become the greatest strength. That silence, when used strategically, can reveal more than any conversation, and that sometimes the only way to truly live is to survive dying first. He stood, stretched, and walked back inside his home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, he was simply grateful. Grateful to be breathing, grateful to be aware, grateful to be free from the lies that had almost destroyed him. The machines had kept him alive while he was silent, but the truth had set him free when he finally spoke. And that, James realized, was the only ending worth having. The end.